The 15-year-old cancer patient's voice cracked as he screamed Elvis's name across the Memphis Coliseum. 50,000 people fell silent. The king dropped his microphone. Everything stopped. What happened next changed not just that boy's life, but Elvis Presley's soul forever. But how did we get here? How did one voice in a sea of thousands reach the heart of the most famous man in the world? 3 hours earlier, backstage at the Memphis Coliseum, Elvis Presley was having the worst night of his career. His white jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. The pills weren't working anymore. The crowd felt distant, cold. At 42, the king was questioning everything: his music, his purpose, his legacy. "Colonel, I don't think I can do this tonight," Elvis whispered to his manager, Tom Parker. His hands were shaking. Not from nerves, from something deeper. A spiritual emptiness that had been eating at him for months. Parker adjusted Elvis's cape. "You're Elvis Presley. You don't have bad nights." But Elvis knew different. He'd been sleepwalking through performances, going through the motions. The fire that once burned in his belly had dimmed to barely glowing embers. Tonight felt like it might be the night it finally died. Meanwhile, 15 rows back in the general admission section, 15-year-old Michael Harrison was fighting a different kind of battle. The chemotherapy had stolen his hair, his strength, most of his childhood. But it hadn't stolen his dream. For 3 years, through hospital visits and treatments, through the nights when the pain was unbearable, Michael had held on to one thing: seeing Elvis Presley live. His mother, Sarah, watched her son's eyes light up as the arena filled. This might be Michael's last concert. The doctors had been honest about that. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Michael was just a kid about to see his hero. Subscribe now and comment below, because what happens next is the most incredible part of this story. The lights dimmed. 50,000 voices roared. Elvis walked onto the stage like he had 1,000 times before, but something was different. His smile felt forced. His movements mechanical. He opened with "CC Rider," but his heart wasn't in it. Halfway through, "Love Me Tender," Elvis stopped mid-verse. The orchestra fumbled to a confused halt. The king was staring into the crowd, his face twisted in concentration. "There's someone out there," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing through the stunned arena. "Someone calling my name." The crowd murmured, confused. Elvis had never done this before. Never stopped a song to talk to the audience like this. But Elvis had heard something. Above all the screaming fans, above the music, above his own voice, he'd heard a different kind of call. A desperate, pure sound that cut through everything else. "Michael!" came the voice again. Weak but determined. "Elvis! Please! It's Michael!" Elvis's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes scanned the sea of faces until they found what they were looking for. A thin boy in a baseball cap, supported by his mother, waving frantically. Even from the stage, Elvis could see it: the pallor, the fragility, the unmistakable look of someone fighting for their life. But there was something else. Something that made Elvis's blood run cold. He knew that face. The arena fell into a death-like silence as Elvis began to understand what he was seeing. Suddenly, Elvis was 8 years old again, standing in the charity ward of Memphis General Hospital. His baby brother, Jesse Garin, had been stillborn, but Elvis remembered the other sick children in that ward. He remembered their faces, their hope, their courage. And he remembered one boy in particular. A boy who'd been fighting leukemia. A boy who'd asked Elvis, just a scared kid himself, to sing for him. Elvis had been too shy then, too scared. He'd run away instead. That boy had died 2 weeks later. Now, 24 years later, Elvis was looking at another dying child. Another boy who needed something Elvis could give. And this time, he wasn't going to run. Elvis handed his guitar to a backup musician and walked to the edge of the stage. The crowd didn't understand what was happening. Some people were confused, others concerned. But Elvis only had eyes for Michael. "Son," Elvis called out, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "What's your name?" "Michael Harrison," the boy called back, his voice cracking with emotion. "I've loved you since I was 5 years old." Elvis felt something break open in his chest. All the emptiness, all the spiritual drought of the past months it was washing away. This boy, this brave, beautiful boy, was reminding him why he'd started singing in the first place. "Well, Michael Harrison," Elvis said, his voice thick with emotion, "would you like to come up here and meet me?" The arena erupted. But Elvis wasn't performing anymore. This wasn't about the show, or the crowd, or even the music. This was about a promise he'd failed to keep 24 years ago to a dying child in a hospital ward. Security helped Michael and his mother through the crowd. When the boy reached the stage, Elvis knelt down to meet him at eye level. Up close, Michael was even more fragile than he'd appeared from the stage. But his eyes burned with a joy so pure it took Elvis's breath away. "I can't believe it's really you," Michael whispered. Elvis pulled off his signature scarf, the one he'd worn in dozens of photos, the one that had become part of his legend, and tied it gently around Michael's thin neck. "Now it is really me," Elvis said softly. "And you know what? I think I needed to meet you more than you needed to meet me." Behind the scenes, Elvis's crew was watching something they'd never seen before. The man who'd conquered the world was being conquered by one 15-year-old boy's courage. What happened next became the stuff of legend. Elvis didn't return to his planned set list. Instead, he sat on the edge of the stage with Michael and asked what songs he wanted to hear. "Can you sing Love Me Tender again?" Michael asked. "But this time, can you sing it for my mom? She's the one who's really been fighting this with me." Elvis looked out at Sarah Harrison, tears streaming down her face, and nodded. He picked up an acoustic guitar and began to sing. But this wasn't the polished, professional version from his albums. This was raw, emotional, real. Every word carried the weight of loss, hope, love, and the preciousness of time. The entire arena was crying. 50,000 people, watching one of the most powerful men in entertainment pour his soul out for a dying child and his mother. When the song ended, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and worn. It was a toy soldier, the kind that cost 25 cents from a gum machine. Paint was chipped off the face, one arm was missing. "I've carried this since I was diagnosed," Michael said. "He's been my brave soldier through all the treatments. I want you to have him." Elvis stared at the tiny, broken toy soldier. In that moment, he understood something profound. Here was a boy who had nothing, no hair, no strength, possibly no future, giving away his most precious possession to someone who had everything. "I can't take this, son," Elvis whispered. "Please," Michael said. "He's done his job for me. Maybe he can help you too." Elvis closed his fingers around the toy soldier, and in that moment, he felt the fire return. The purpose. The reason he'd been put on this earth. Share this video and subscribe, because this is where the story becomes something no one could have predicted. Elvis stood up, still holding Michael's hand, and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and strong for the first time in months. "Tonight you've all witnessed something I needed to see. True courage. This young man has reminded me what it means to be brave, what it means to give everything you have for something you believe in." He looked down at Michael. "And he's reminded me what it means to be truly rich." Elvis began to sing again. "How great thou art!" But this time the entire arena joined in. 50,000 voices lifted in harmony, all inspired by the courage of one 15-year-old boy. The concert went on for 3 hours. Elvis sang every song Michael requested, told stories, laughed, cried, and connected with his audience in a way he hadn't done in years. The performance was later called one of the greatest of his career. But for Elvis, the real transformation happened in those first few minutes, kneeling on the stage with the dying boy who taught him about living. What happened next shocked everyone who knew Elvis. The next morning, he drove himself not in a limousine, not with security, to Memphis Children's Hospital. He walked into the cancer ward unannounced, carrying his guitar and a bag full of scarves. "I want to meet every kid who can't make it to my shows," he told the stunned nurses. For 3 hours, Elvis went room to room, singing lullabies to children who couldn't lift their heads, holding tiny hands that barely had strength to squeeze back, and leaving his scarves with mothers who hadn't smiled in months. One little girl, maybe 7 years old, asked Elvis why he was crying. He knelt beside her bed and said, "Because someone taught me last night that the strongest people in the world are sometimes the smallest." Word spread. Within days, hospitals across the country were calling, asking if Elvis would visit their young patients. And he did. City after city, between concerts, Elvis would slip away from the glittery world of entertainment to sit with children who were fighting battles no child should ever face. The media tried to turn it into a publicity stunt, but Elvis refused all cameras, all interviews. "This isn't about me," he'd tell reporters. "These kids don't need a celebrity. They need someone who sees them." Michael Harrison passed away 6 weeks later. He was buried with Elvis's scarf. His mother said that even in his final days, Michael would touch the scarf and smile, remembering the night the king of rock and roll stopped everything just for him. But Sarah Harrison had something else to tell. 3 days before Michael died, Elvis had called the hospital. Not his people, not his manager Elvis himself. He sang, "Love Me Tender," over the phone while Michael listened, too weak to speak but strong enough to smile. "He remembered my boy," Sarah would tell anyone who'd listen. "The most famous man in the world remembered my dying child's name." Elvis kept the toy soldier for the rest of his life. He carried it in his pocket during every performance. After Elvis's death in 1977, the soldier was found on his nightstand, worn smooth from being held so often. But there's something most people don't know. In Elvis's personal effects, investigators found a notebook. Page after page filled with names, dates, and details. Every child he'd met in every hospital. Their favorite songs, their dreams, their fears. Michael Harrison's entry was the longest 3 full pages of memories from their 15 minutes together. At the bottom of Michael's page, Elvis had written, "He taught me that giving away your most precious thing doesn't make you poorer. It makes you rich in ways money never could." The notebook revealed something else that shocked even those closest to Elvis. He'd been secretly funding medical treatments for dozens of families. Cancer treatments, surgeries, experimental procedures all paid for anonymously through a foundation Elvis had created but never publicized. Dr. Patricia Williams, who worked at Memphis Children's Hospital for 30 years, only revealed the truth after Elvis's death. "We'd get calls from Elvis's people asking about specific children. Within hours, their medical bills would be mysteriously paid in full. Parents would cry, thinking it was a miracle. We knew it was Elvis, but we were sworn to secrecy." One entry in Elvis's notebook stands out. A little girl named Amy Chin, age 6, leukemia patient. Elvis had met her during one of his hospital visits. She'd been too shy to speak, but she'd hummed along when Elvis sang, "Love Me Tender." 2 weeks later, Amy's parents received a call. An anonymous donor was flying the entire family to a specialist in Switzerland. The treatment was experimental, expensive, and Amy's only hope. Amy Chin survived. She grew up to become a pediatric oncologist. At her medical school graduation, she held up a photo of herself with Elvis. "This man saved my life twice," she told the audience. "Once with his kindness, and once with his heart." But the most incredible discovery came from Elvis's bodyguard, Red West. In 1976, a year before Elvis died, Red found him in his bedroom at Graceland, holding Michael's toy soldier and crying. "Boss, you okay?" Red had asked. Elvis looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Red, I've been thinking about that boy, Michael. About all those kids. What if I'd started visiting hospitals earlier? What if I'd paid attention sooner? How many children could I have helped?" Red sat down beside him. "Boss, you can't save everyone." "Maybe not," Elvis whispered. "But that boy taught me something. He showed me that even when you're dying, you can still give life to someone else. Every kid I meet now, every family I help, that's Michael's gift to the world." But the real legacy of that night lived on in Elvis himself. He began visiting children's hospitals regularly. He started a foundation for childhood cancer research. He never again took the stage without remembering Michael Harrison and the lesson about courage, generosity, and what it truly means to be rich. Years later, when asked about his most memorable performance, Elvis never mentioned his comeback special, his Vegas residency, or his movie soundtracks. He always talked about the night in Memphis when a 15-year-old boy taught him how to be human again. The toy soldier now sits in a place of honor at Graceland, with a plaque that reads, "From Michael Harrison, who reminded Elvis that the bravest soldiers are often the smallest ones. Some gifts change everything. Some voices, even when they're breaking, can heal a broken soul. And sometimes the king learns the most important lesson of his life from a dying child who chose to give rather than receive." That's the real magic of Elvis Presley, not his music, not his fame, but his ability to recognize when someone needed him to be more than an entertainer. To be human. To be present. To be real. Subscribe to this channel, share this story, and keep the memory alive of the night Elvis Presley proved that true royalty isn't about crowns or stages or screaming fans. It's about kneeling down to meet someone exactly where they are and giving them everything you have to give.